last one of the day. We're going to be talking about human trafficking as it pertains to Long Island, as it pertains to us, right? We're going to be talking a little bit about Nassau, a little bit about Suffolk, some real life cases, and some of the things being done on Long Island to prevent human trafficking and to serve survivors of human trafficking. So there's a lot of misconceptions with society and the way that we view human trafficking, right? So at the Safe Center, we're trying to dispel some of those myths. And that's what we're going to be working on a little bit today, is dispelling some of the myths around human trafficking. The idea that people still refer to prostitution as someone being a prostitute rather than someone being prostituted, because the whole idea is that someone who's being prostituted is usually someone who's being trafficked. We're trying to even change and strengthen our language around these types of crimes. At the Safe Center, we serve survivors of human trafficking, domestic violence, child abuse, and sexual assault. All of our services are free and confidential, and this is our 24/7 hotline. Had anyone heard of the Safe Center before just now? Beautiful. Awesome. I figured that. Yeah, so I am Liz, which I also didn't tell you. My name is Liz. I'm an educator at the Safe Center. I usually go out and do these conversations in high schools and in colleges, and when I ask them if they've heard about the Safe Center, they have never heard of us, right? And we're also just trying to spread the word, let people know that these services exist. So, starting at the Safe Center, I began as a hospital advocate. So we have advocates that will go and meet survivors of these types of crimes in the hospital at any point. We work 12-hour shifts so that they're covered 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So I worked or volunteered my time as a hospital advocate, and that's where I really became immersed in these types of things and in this lifestyle of serving survivors. Some of the cases, even in the hospitals, were called in to the Safe Center as domestic violence. But when I arrived at the hospital and had a conversation with a young girl who had 2 cell phones and awesome nails, better than mine right now, I'm going to get them done after, so don't know. But these girls, I would just start asking them some questions and just talk to them a little bit and find out that the domestic violence that the people thought was happening, this boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, was actually a pimp-victim relationship. And this person was beat up not by their partner, but by the gang members that their partner knows. And these things are trafficking situations. So we're all kind of learning and progressing in all different settings, and that's why it's just important to open up these conversations. At the hospital, they would tell me things like, if a young girl was 13 years old and ended up in the hospital, sometimes they'll provide what's called a rape kit. But sometimes, because human trafficking or prostitution is not legal on Long Island or in New York, so these young girls will call the police on themselves and say that they've been raped so that they can go to the hospital instead of a jail cell. And that's where I meet them. And at the hospital, those biases still exist where they will tell me, she doesn't need an advocate, she doesn't need you, she comes here every other week, she's fine. But I just stepped in, gave her a little bit of a choice and asked, like, hey, would you want me to just come and chill with you for a little bit? And she was like, yeah, honestly, I would like for you to just sit with me. And I sat with her for hours and hours because she came from a group home. And when they called her a group home, it wasn't like if you called my mom and told her I'm in the hospital. She would be right there, right? But for her, they called her group home and they didn't come to come get her for hours and hours and hours. And we sat and we watched TV and we talked about the awards show and her nails and where she got them done. And that's where I realized that she was a survivor of human trafficking and that she had been going through these things. And to her, it was normal because this new boyfriend and these new friends didn't beat her or abuse her or rape her the way that her past pimps did. So to her, this was an improvement. We're going to talk about some of the things that make individuals vulnerable, but things like living in a group home, things like coming from a vulnerable home, things like being sexually abused in your past. When someone takes something from you that you don't even know is yours, right? And someone takes it and steals it from you, your virginity, your consent, right? It's a lot easier to just be caught up in something that feels like a choice, that feels like, well, I get to choose who I'm having sex with and at least I get something from it instead of just being raped every night. So for me as an advocate and us as workers to try to walk in and be like, hey, I know what's best. You need to get out of this life. That guy doesn't love you. She's like, girl, you don't know me and you need to leave, right? We need to meet survivors of human trafficking where they are. We need to try to recognize a little bit about how they're feeling. Because to us, it may seem like that's absurd. They don't love you. You need to leave. I need to come in and save you from this situation. And they're like, you're not saving me from anything, right? So we do have to recognize and even talk about these issues a little differently. So has anyone heard any types of biases that exist in society? If you hear the word prostitute, do any words come to mind? Yes, ma'am. Slut? Yeah, exactly. A lot of times we think that you can equate being trafficked to someone who's just like maybe a slut, open, liberal with their body, right? Anything else that someone might relate to being a prostitute? Any thoughts? Maybe on drugs. Yeah, exactly. Maybe they just appear that way because of the fact that their perpetrator has gotten them addicted to drugs, because of the fact that their perpetrator has starved them for a long period of time, and then we think, wow, they just got on drugs and chose this life, right? Not us, particularly in this room, I believe, but in society we come across a lot of different values, a lot of different ideas. And being a part of this work, I bring this up at the worst times, Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas, whenever I want to talk about something serious, right, that no one else wants to talk about. And people do have these myths in their mind that I try to just dispel in the most, calm and educational, informative way. But not everyone is aware, especially when we see things like this.
I don't know who you are. I don't know what you want. If you were looking for ransom, I could tell you I don't have money. But I do have a very particular set of skills. Skills I've acquired for a very long career. Skills that let me and my method kill like you. If you let my daughter go now, that'll be the end of it. I will not look for you. I will not pursue you. But if you don't, I will look for you. I will find you. And I will kill you.
Okay, so has anyone heard of this movie, Taken? Yeah, so a lot of times when I bring up human trafficking in high schools, the kids will either laugh that that's not a thing, doesn't exist, or they'll refer to the movie Taken, that they've seen that, they know what trafficking is, they're good, right? And we just try to help them to see that that is a sensationalized version of cases that don't usually happen in these ways, right? We talked about some of the vulnerabilities that exist, coming from a group home, coming from maybe a home that is not ideal, or an ideal situation as far as trauma and stress environment, right? So the idea that it would be someone whose father is someone who has an amazing set of skills that can kill you with their bare hands, right, is not necessarily the type of people that traffickers, who are actually very manipulative and keen to what's going on, are picking up on. So these types of things, someone with their head down as opposed to their head up, these types of things are key points that traffickers pick up on and are known for being on the street, for living on the street, for being able to survive on the streets. So they are keen to things that maybe we wouldn't be, right? They can hear things that we might not be able to hear. They can understand things that we can't understand because we were not born and raised on the streets like some people that are engaging in these drugs or pimping other people out have. So there's another show on Netflix called The Girlfriend Experience. Has anyone heard of that one? It's a little more glamorizing this life.
You are Christine. And you didn't tell me she was so beautiful. She's great. I'm on my second year of law school. I do realize it's your passion. But did you and Avery talk about it? It's whatever you're comfortable with. And how much will get paid. So, what are you comfortable with? Yeah, I'm fine with all that.
I mean, it's not something that I want to make into a career. I only do it a few times a month.
Does this kind of work make you scared?
No, I've got it under control. I cannot understand why you would do something so stupid.
Because I like it.
Do you love it?
Yes.
Okay, so the girlfriend experience, again, it does glamorize and touches on a lot of the myths that we were talking about. She talked about being in complete control, which is not the case for these individuals. She talked about being able to get the money, right? The idea that she was making $4,000 on a date. These ideas that make it seem something that is attractive to other people, when obviously that's not the reality or even the face of human trafficking. Being in control, the idea that she has choices, right? She made it very clear in that video that she does it because she likes it. She does it because she has choices in the matter. And that is just not a great way to depict human trafficking. And the next video that you've already previewed is not as glamorized to watch, but this is the reality of human trafficking.
You gotta come up with at least 500 and got you. And then one night he sent me outside in the area where we live to make $500, which is impossible. I don't even know how I got to the hospital. Last night I turned myself to the beat without going to piece of wood, which I had to block out. Like, I really thank God that I don't remember what happened. Because I don't think I'd be able to sleep at night. I always knew something was going to happen. And I was like almost praying for something. Like, I didn't want to get hurt, badly hurt or anything like that. But I was praying for a situation to happen so that I'd be able to go home.
So that obviously does depict the reality, the idea that girls who are saying that they want to be doing this are actually praying for something traumatic to happen so that they can go home. And that's probably a thought that we haven't had to deal with, right? The idea that you wish that something to this extent may happen so that you can see your mother again, right? Because this idea that we have, the idea that women are swooped up into a truck or taken off the street and bound and put into the back of a truck or back of a car, right? And that's not exactly how it happens. Many of these girls are manipulated into this lifestyle. And when that happens, it's a lot harder to help them to see that they don't deserve this, that they are a victim of a crime, right? So there's also some terms that we use when discussing human trafficking. Things like commercial sexual exploitation of children. That's an important one that we'll refer to as CSEC, just because the idea that the act of sex is being for transaction purposes. The idea that we may refer to the life or the game, being in the life, this has to do with the idea of being someone who is commercially exploited. They'll refer to that as being in the life. Maybe you've heard the word pimp before, but I'm sure we have not heard it being equated to the word trafficker, right? Pimp in our society is actually looked at as something that's glamorized as well, and looked at as something that's cool, or seen to be cool. But a pimp is a trafficker. A pimp is someone who is selling another human being as if they are an object. The tracks or the stroll is somewhere where women who are being prostituted and men as well. But most likely on the tracks and the stroll, we see women being forced to walk up and down these tracks and these strolls. It could just be a specific block. It could be a specific area, specific rooms in a motel or a hotel. These types of things have names, maybe where a specific pimp owns that territory or feels that he has seniority over that territory. So some other pimps that we talk about with human trafficking are the types of pimps that exist. Now, when we're talking about the gorilla pimp and the Romeo pimp, it's important to recognize that that is not Romeo and that is not the gorilla that we are talking about. But it does help us to have a clearer picture of what I'm talking about. There are pimps that are known as gorilla pimps, spelled G-U-E. And the idea that these pimps are violent, these pimps are ruthless. These pimps use violence and force and rape and weapons to have power and control over their victims. There's something called the Gorilla Pimp Handbook that I've seen while engaging in this type of work. And we'll talk more about trauma bonds, but what a pimp has given advice to another pimp, he said that if you're the one to beat her so bad with a hanger, as long as you run her a bath and give her pills afterwards, she won't remember that you were the one that beat her so bad. And they have these tactics as gorilla pimps to make sure that someone's kept under their control. The Romeo pimp is someone who looks more like Prince Charming and who comes out of somewhere, out of nowhere seemingly, and has everything that you could ever want. You've had trouble in school, so have they. You're on a video game system talking about how much you hate your mom and how much you fight, and so have they, right? They've been through the same thing, and they've survived it, right? And they can help you do that. They know you've never had that love from maybe a father figure or a male figure in your life, so they want to give that to you, and they will do anything to make you feel loved. And all of a sudden it turns into, you know, I love you so much, right? And that person may feel it and say, yeah, I can tell that you love me. All right, well, do you love me back? Yeah, I do. If you loved me, then maybe you'd go out and have sex with one of my friends, or we need to make some money. You like how I take you out all the time, right? Well, if you want to keep living this lifestyle, you're going to have to contribute. And all of a sudden, this person who you're so in love with has convinced you that this is okay. And you're wrapped up in it. And now Prince Charming is pimping out his Cinderella, right? And these types of things are not love stories. These types of things are not fairy tales. Another red flag of human trafficking is things like branding, things like tattoos in places like the neck, places like the face. These types of things make it even harder for someone to live what even trafficked individuals will refer to as the square life. So that's something we have to understand too, is that we may be thinking things about them, or society may be thinking things about them, that they're slutty, they are dirty, they are on drugs. They're thinking things about us. We live a square life. We go and work during the day when it's light out. That's absurd to them. We use skills that are not sexual skills, right, to make money. That's not normal to them. We live a square life, and we have to recognize that they're making it harder for someone to get back. They're even stigmatizing the reality of life, right, to make it seem like the life of being trafficked is better, and that they live a square life, and that we live this more exciting and elaborate, and we can get more things and go out to more places, right? So these brandings are really important for traffickers. Another way that we see they are treating them like cattle, like animals, like objects. So there are different ways that CSEC, or that commercial sexual exploitation, is perpetrated. The tracks and the stroll, like street prostitution, things like pornography, where it translates into just filming it and selling it, right? And if it's a non-consensual act, then that is human trafficking. Stripping, we'll talk about the age of entry into human trafficking, but many of the girls who are stripping at strip clubs are not 18. Many of the girls who are forced into this life are not of age, are not there of their own free will. So there are all different ways that this type of crime is perpetrated through gangs, right? The idea that we're probably well aware that gangs make a lot of their money by selling drugs, right? That's like their main kind of profit, right? They have admitted that selling drugs means that the drugs run out. You sell it to one person and it's the end of that drug. But when you have a person that you can sell over and over and over again, that profit is never ending. And that's why gang-based prostitution or trafficking is really popular as well. We've even seen things as far as interfamilial pimping, where your pimp is your mother, your father, who sells you into this because they have to decide whether you are going to be trafficked or if we can keep the lights on for the rest of the family, or if we can have food in the fridge for the rest of your siblings, right? And we've seen things such as desperation cause these things, and also things such as disregard, where someone who needs to get their next fix and needs to get their next round of drugs is willing to do anything for that fix. And that's why we address these issues sometimes hand in hand, the drug problem as well as the trafficking problem. And we talked a little bit about that internet-based, the way that people are using any form of internet-based exploitation these days, using apps on our phones, using Snapchat, using Instagram, using dating apps, using video game systems where traffickers will actually go onto those gaming systems where you can wear the headset, and that's where things like that have happened, where they hear things in the home and they say, it sounds like you're having a rough time over there. You should come meet me and my friends. We're really fun. Then you get on the bus and you meet them, and it turns into a trafficking situation. Recognizing that teens are engaging in that type of behavior. Talking to people online, as adults, we could say, we've learned our lesson maybe, right? Hopefully not the hard way, but we shouldn't talk to strangers online, or we shouldn't try to meet strange people who say they're someone and they have no pictures of themselves, right? These types of things make sense to us, but to youth, we just had a wonderful workshop on that this morning, that they are novelty seeking. Youth their brains are wired to always be looking for something that's new, that's exciting. So we may not understand why they're reaching out to people online or trying to take a bus to meet this new couple that they met. We just have to understand that sometimes it's not as innocent as people make it seem. The idea that human trafficking, the actual definition, an act of recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, or obtaining a person for compelled labor or commercial sex acts through the use of force, fraud, and coercion. Those three terms are really important as far as, under the law, getting a conviction of human trafficking. If the person is under the age of 17, then it is automatically human trafficking, because that person cannot consent. And if someone is having sex with them, we don't need to find force, fraud, or coercion to prove trafficking or sexual assault. So we're going to break that down a little bit. The idea that force and fraud are very almost obvious. I would think that force could be physical. It could be physical force. It could be manipulation. Fraud, the same thing. Many people telling you that you're going to have a better life when you come over here. When R. Kelly told those girls that they were going to be superstars if they came and lived in his home. He's R. Kelly. Has anyone heard of R. Kelly? Yeah, a lot of people have heard of him. He's a real big star, so when you told me that I'm going to be a star if I come stay with you, it's not my fault that I listened, right? It's not my fault that I thought you were telling me the truth when I came to stay with you. But then it turned into an entire human trafficking ring where he was forcing these girls to call him daddy, forcing them to, he would confiscate their cell phones, confiscate all connection with anyone outside. So these types of things escalated, right, from the force and from the fraud. Now coercion is sometimes a little bit more tricky. The idea that even a threat of serious harm. Now, there have been recent cases that have shown that withdrawal does present serious harm to a person, and physical harm as well. So if someone is threatening to take away the drugs that they have been providing to their victim, that is a form of coercion. That is a form of force, fraud, and coercion that they can use to prosecute a human trafficking case. So things like even just threatening someone that if you leave, I'm going to take your drugs. The idea that many of these people may have past convictions. Coming from the streets, they may have crimes like theft or things that don't qualify someone to be deported or arrested. But when someone hangs that over your head and tells you, if you try to leave me, I will deport you, I will arrest you, these types of things do keep someone under another person's control. Also creating a climate of fear. This could just be making something up. The idea that the pimp handbook has all these rules and guidelines against how to keep someone under your control. If you tell them about Jenny, who you brutally beat and killed because she disobeyed you, how many people you think are going to disobey you after that, right? If all you talk about is Jenny and how she disobeyed you and she got killed in a brutal way, right? Jenny never even existed. This climate of fear is enough to prove that coercion in these cases. As I said before, if a person's underage, we don't need to prove these types of things. We also talked a little bit about that chemical tether, the idea that it is a very intersectional crime, that these things are happening together, that drug abuse often does coincide with human trafficking, and it's a way that pimps and traffickers are keeping their victims under their control, threatening to take their drugs away, upping their dosage as soon as they come in contact with them. They start providing them, feeding them more drugs. These types of things make someone actually physically connected without the handcuffs even being there. So I know even in the beginning, even right here, we use a lot of that symbolism, like handcuffs and chains, and solving human trafficking is breaking the chains, right? The chains are not always real. The chains are not always physical. And we have to be willing to break all of these types of chains and understand all these types of connections and tethers that are keeping people in these situations and allowing it to continue. Things that allow it to continue are these drugs, right? The idea that they know exactly what drugs will make someone more vulnerable, less likely to fight back, and they know exactly what drugs will allow their victims to work longer hours and to have sex with more clients, right? Or to be raped by more clients. We also talk about these terms, if we get to that point, the idea that a person who buys sex, a lot of times we'll try to humanize these types of people who are buying young girls, refer to them as Johns. Has anyone heard that term? A sex buyer as a John. Yeah, so sorry if anyone's John in here, but the idea that we do try to humanize this idea and call them Johns. And Johns have this idea that when these women are on drugs that they look so happy, right? Because they're on drugs, and because they're manipulated, and because they're beat when they don't look happy, right? So these types of things are important to recognize because we have faced that combativeness, even from Johns. We have done something called Flush the Johns, where when there has been a bust in Nassau County, I had the privilege, or the opposite of privilege, of training this individual who had been convicted of buying sex. And I had to sit there and talk to him about the little girls. I wanted to put a picture of his daughter on the screen, but they said that was taking it too far. But I just wanted to help him to see the realities, because for him, he was just someone who would just buy sex. He thought that if I can't get it, then I can just buy it, right? So these types of things are, again, we're facing this combativeness. We're facing this idea from Johns who will tell us, yeah, I'm doing it, and they're happy when I'm having sex with them. Not recognizing the fake reality of it and the idea that these women are forced and subjected to using drugs. This person, this man Andrew Fields, was convicted in Florida. He was one of the first cases where the drug addiction and withdrawal was used to prosecute him as a perpetrator of human trafficking. So he doesn't look too much like a Romeo pimp or Prince Charming, right? No judgment here. But the idea that this person was not a gorilla pimp, this person was a Romeo pimp. This person tricked and manipulated and convinced these girls that he loved them. He gave them drugs to prove to them, you like drugs, I'll give you even more drugs. Until all of a sudden, they were completely dependent on him. And he would let them live in their home, and he would put them in unreachable amounts of debt until they would have sex with more people. And these types of things eventually got him caught up, and they were able to arrest and convict him with human trafficking because of the chemical tether that he created by giving these women drugs and then threatening to take them away. That's why he's up here. Talks about the idea that we're dispelling some myths. We have this myth maybe that sex workers are adults, right? All of them. They all chose this lifestyle from when they were little girls. We always ask little kids, what do you want to be when they grow up, right? We just assume that that little girl said, I want to be a sex worker, I want to be a prostitute, I want to sell my body, right? These types of things don't usually go from that to that, right? It does start in a lot of different ways. So the idea that they're all adults.
I got into my life when I was 12 years old. I was 17 in high school at the time. I was in the life since I was 16. I was 13. Yeah, I was 14. I was 15, 16, 13 and a half, going to 14. 12.
I started at the age of 13 into sex exploitation. It's like, at the age of 13, what choices do I have?
So again, just to show some of the realities, this video comes from a movie called Very Young Girls. And it's all about very young girls very young girls who are being trafficked. It showed us that the average age of entry into the life is 13 years old. 13, when someone should be learning about themselves, learning about life, learning about the world, but these girls are already stuck in something that we can't even fathom, right? These girls are from right around here. This does show a specific demographic, but this agency is in Harlem, and we're going to show some more survivors of trafficking just to show that, of course, anyone can be trafficked, and anyone can be a trafficker, and anyone can be a John. And the idea that we even have ideas of what they look like, what they might sound like, just trying to dispel that a little bit. These are some of the survivors who feel, you know, at the age of 13, what choices do I have? Do they have a voice in this world, or do we tell children to be seen and not heard, right? These ideas that there are so many social values that are contributing to this problem. Of course, the idea that it is a huge problem. This is the face of human trafficking. We also have this idea that all of the women in the life are independent contractors, because their pimps will try to make that be known. If they're advertising them online, they will write independent contractor. They will write indie prostitute looking for some fun, right? Because it's more appealing when it doesn't seem like you have a pimp controlling you, right? Many of these people are still being controlled. Many of these independent contractors are forced to turn all their money over. Even when someone has started out as an individual who has chosen to get into this lifestyle, remember that picture of Andrew Fields, our Santa Claus friend, right? He posed online as a security guard for escorts. So his advertisement said, him on his Harley with his muscles flexed, that he will protect you. You're an independent contractor who wants to sell your body, that's great. I'll protect you and I'll make sure that these Johns don't hurt you. And that's when he got them addicted to drugs and manipulated them, and also started selling the girls and putting them in debt that they could never reach. He became their pimp, right? He became their Prince Charming Romeo pimp. But we had this idea that they got into this on their own, right? That they would be doing this either way. And that's just not the case. These pimps even have ways of picking up the independent contractors and saying, oh yeah, you're doing a great job on your own, but I've been doing this longer and I can help you out. Now all of a sudden, they have a pimp who controls them.
She was really upset because she was like, I think he's really going to be upset if we don't have any money. And so we had to keep going to trials. And sometimes we would stop and we would cry. And I just wanted to die. And I started to just think that maybe I deserved this for doing this to my parents and myself.
So obviously, again, the reality is showing that anyone can be a survivor of trafficking. The idea that, again, she talks about maybe she deserves this because of what she did. So in her case, she wasn't swooped up off the street, she ran away, right? Sometimes young people who feel like it's the end of the world will run away from their homes. She ran away in this case, and that's when someone told her, like, hey, you shouldn't be walking out here alone, right? You're so beautiful, come on, let's just go get some food, right? They manipulated her into this situation. But it got so deep, she started being manipulated and started being trafficked to the point that then she felt so low that she felt like she deserved this. She felt so guilty that she felt like I shouldn't leave, right? And that goes back to the point of me trying to jump in, like, hey girl, let's get out of this life together, right? And she's like, no, I deserve this, right? I left my family, whatever's happening to me, I deserve it, right? And that's what we're fighting against too. The idea that they have put them to this point, they have put them down there, right? So had anyone heard of this case in Muttontown? There was a case of labor trafficking. So at the Safe Center, we don't only serve survivors of sex trafficking, we serve labor trafficking survivors as well. In this case, the individuals were being brutalized, were being forced to eat their own vomit, were being forced to sleep on bath mats, right? This was happening in Muttontown. If anyone's familiar with Muttontown, the only place I've ever been was when I had one friend, she wasn't really a friend, she was an acquaintance. She had a castle in Muttontown She had the biggest mansion with a basketball court and a tennis court, and it was so awesome. I'd never seen anything like it. And right across the street, this was happening, right? Trafficking is not the dirty, sleazy prostitutes that we might think of, right? Someone who was promised a better life and given something way worse. Something that just happened in November. The labor trafficking can exist in massage parlors. Legitimate businesses do exist, but people that are taking advantage, locking people in rooms, also exist. And this just happened. And this is where we will serve these survivors. We have a support group for survivors that come in, and we have all different language translations so that they can get back on their feet, realize that they're not stuck in this situation. Had anyone heard of the Gilgo Beach case? Yeah, so even just the way that that was presented in the media, right? The idea that there was a bunch of these murders, right, of these women, they're trying to figure out who did it, and then they put in the news, missing prostitutes' bones found on Long Island. There were many headlines that referred to these women as prostitutes. In a lot of ways that dehumanizes, even if they don't mean to, right? They're dehumanizing, they're disconnecting us from these individuals. And it's really easy to do that moving forward, especially after these women have died and we can't even humanize them. We can't even recognize that they had lives and families. The idea that they had names, right? And that they were women with futures. So, again, that goes back to the idea that a lot of the things I was saying, our language does matter. Even just referring to someone as a teen prostitute is an oxymoron and is incorrect because a teen cannot prostitute themselves out because they cannot consent to sex. So obviously, but people will still use that term. Like I said, going to the hospital, they'll say, you know, she's a teen and a prostitute. Those two things can't go together. This person is a trafficked youth. Empowering survivors rather than after we help them to see that they're a victim of a crime, empowering them as survivors. And again, the idea that I cannot and we cannot rescue anyone, all we can do is support them in their healing. Again, the idea that these beautiful women all had names. We talked about the glamorization of the pimp culture, and I'm sure maybe you've heard some of these songs or these shows, right? I used to watch Pimp My Ride all the time, not ever thinking or being in this work. So there are some more cases that happened right here on Long Island, in Suffolk County. There was a whole prostitution ring or a trafficking ring. This person is just our example of a guerrilla pimp because he was using drugs and physical force and violence to manipulate the women in his control, right here in Plainview, right near our office, the State Center.
Hey, honey, I was thinking, you want to do something a little special this weekend?
I was thinking of changing things up. How about relaxing in a nice steam bath in one of the luxury rooms at the new Comac Motor Inn? Just think, no kids, total privacy, just me and you.
Ooh, how could I resist?
The new Comac Motor Inn, open 24/7, is a motel operated with the care of a hotel. Whether a short stay or extended overnight stay, the CMI guarantees you a clean, safe, quiet, strictly confidential environment with 83 well-appointed rooms, featuring some with steam baths, and has a quick drive-in window for your convenience.
I just think it's funny how they said extended overnight stays, as if like you don't go to a hotel to stay overnight. That's what people do, but obviously in this case they're talking about shortened stays, a few hours, to take a nap, you know what they mean. So these types of things exist all over. The idea that trafficking doesn't only happen in places like that. Trafficking happens in places where I've had my family stay when they came for a wedding, right? Trafficking is happening, and so many people do contribute to letting it happen, to normalizing it, right? And that's just what we're trying to say is how many people play a role, right? Even at like, we did a fundraising event with a tattoo shop, and we help them to realize that they're serving survivors when they refuse to give gang tattoos, and they will cover up for free a branding tattoo on someone's neck or something. They'll cover up tattoos of someone who doesn't want to be in the life anymore. Tattoo artists had no idea that they are serving survivors of trafficking. Hotel owners, hospitality people, they need to recognize they are contributing when they let these things happen under their watch. Places like Backpage were finally held responsible for contributing. They were actually shut down for being able to sell young women things like New in Town, things like creating a new language so that they can get by and sell little girls online. Just some examples of those ads. We talked also about the idea of the connection that is formed, right? Alternating kindness and violence. I killed Jenny, but I love you, right? So all of a sudden, you'll do anything that person says. These are trauma bonds that go along with the shame and the stigma, and of course, physical isolation. The idea that these women are not getting the treatment that they deserve for any of the illnesses they're experiencing, STDs, brain injuries, depression, anxiety. The death rate for women being prostituted is 40 times higher than the general population. It has a lot to do with the way that the media dehumanizes, that the way we criminalize the prostitutes rather than the people engaging in this. And we'll talk about why are people engaging in this, right? Some of them claim that it's a way to have sex without the responsibilities, right? These all came from Johns. About 800 Johns were surveyed to come up with these answers. The idea that there's not really any pressing reason that they cannot have consensual sex, besides the idea that maybe they have never learned about consent. Instead, they've heard things like this: no big deal, it's just like getting a beer. Or prostitutes let you do things that real women wouldn't let you do. Being able to masturbate without any of the work, or she's instantly a sexual creature. These are the types of ways that men who buy sex refer to women. And it's important to challenge these dynamics. So obviously the idea that it does connect, and we talked about the connection to all different types of negative effects. So just recapping that at the Safe Center, we do have our Human Trafficking Department where we serve survivors, over 500 in 2018. We also work with the Trafficking Intervention Court, so that's even helping our county to understand that the women and men being trafficked are victims of crimes, so they treat it that way. With our advocates at court, I mentioned how we have all different translation services, and we also have safe housing specifically for trafficking survivors. So these services are really great, all free, confidential services, and I hope that you learned something from today. So thank you for sticking it out with me.